Why dismissive avoidants stay in unhappy relationships? Most people assume that if someone is unhappy in a relationship, they'll either speak up or leave. Simple logic, right? But with dismissive avoidance, that's rarely the case. These are the people who can be dissatisfied for years and still not walk away. They can be emotionally distant, disconnected, and seemingly uninvested, yet remain physically present. To the outside world, it looks like contradiction. But if you dig into the psychology of dismissive avoidance, you'll realize it's not about happiness, it's about comfort, control, and a deeply ingrained fear of emotional upheaval. First, let's understand what being a dismissive avoidant really means in this context. This attachment style forms when someone grows up learning that emotional closeness is unsafe or unreliable. They adapt by becoming self-reliant to an extreme. Love and intimacy are uncomfortable for them. Vulnerability feels like exposure, and dependence feels like danger. Now here's the paradox. While they avoid deep connection, they also avoid the disruption of losing a relationship. For them, leaving isn't just about breaking up. It's about destabilizing a fragile world they've worked hard to control. One of the biggest reasons dismissive avoidants stay in unhappy relationships is something we can call the low emotional investment trap. Because they rarely go all in emotionally, they don't burn out as fast as someone who's fully engaged. For a person with an anxious attachment style, emotional dissatisfaction is exhausting and unbearable. They want resolution fast. But for a dismissive avoidant, the dissatisfaction is numbed by their low engagement. They can coast for months or years in a relationship without feeling the urgency to fix or end it. In their mind, the discomfort is manageable because they're not fully letting themselves feel it. Another reason is conflict avoidance, but not in the typical "I want peace" way. Dismissive avoidants often fear the emotional intensity of conflict. Ending a relationship means conversations, vulnerability, and dealing with the other person's emotions, which are all things they dread. It's not that they're okay with being unhappy, it's that leaving would require them to wade through an emotional storm they have no desire to face. Staying, even if it's in quiet misery, feels easier than confronting the chaos of a breakup. Then there's the fear of vulnerability after separation. Dismissive avoidants may appear confident and independent, but many of them secretly fear the void that comes after a breakup. Yes, they pride themselves on self-sufficiency, but losing the stability of a partner, even one they're unhappy with, can trigger feelings they've spent a lifetime suppressing. Loneliness, abandonment, and even shame. Ironically, their attachment avoidance doesn't protect them from post-breakup vulnerability. It just delays it. And so, they stay. Some dismissive avoidants also have a practical attachment to their relationships. They view relationships less through the lens of passion or emotional fulfillment and more through utility. If the relationship provides stability, financial security, a social role, or simply a convenient arrangement, they may weigh those factors more heavily than emotional satisfaction. For them, a relationship can function like a reliable car. It might not excite them anymore, but if it still gets them where they need to go, they'll keep it. It's also important to recognize the role of emotional denial. Many dismissive avoidants genuinely downplay their unhappiness, even to themselves. They've spent years training their brains to disconnect from emotional pain. If their needs aren't being met, they tell themselves it's fine. If the intimacy is gone, they convince themselves they didn't need it anyway. They rationalize their unhappiness into something tolerable, making it possible to stay for much longer than someone with a secure attachment would. Interestingly, many dismissive avoidants hold on to control as their secret weapon. In their minds, as long as they're the one not needing too much, not chasing, not emotionally dependent, they feel safe. Even if they're unhappy, they may still feel in control of the situation, and that control can be more valuable to them than emotional fulfillment. Leaving a relationship might mean losing that control, especially if the breakup is initiated by the other person or if it forces them into unfamiliar territory. Another subtle but powerful reason they stay is fear of change. People often assume dismissive avoidants are fearless because they detach so easily. But detachment isn't the same as adaptability. Change, especially when it disrupts routines and stability, can feel threatening. An unhappy relationship is still familiar. It's predictable. And for someone who's already wired to avoid emotional risk, the unknown of life after leaving can seem far more uncomfortable than the current dissatisfaction. Then there's the factor of hidden hope. This might surprise you, but dismissive avoidants sometimes hold quiet, unspoken hopes that things will improve without them having to actively work on it. They may think, maybe my partner will change, or maybe life circumstances will get better. This passive hope allows them to stay put without making big emotional investments. It's a wait-and-see approach that can drag on for years. You also can't overlook the ego factor. For some dismissive avoidants, leaving an unhappy relationship can feel like admitting failure. And failure is not something they want to face. They may tell themselves they're strong for enduring, that they're above emotional drama, or that other people leave too easily. In reality, this is a defense mechanism to protect their self-image. Because admitting they're in an unfixable relationship would mean acknowledging emotional vulnerability. A deeper, darker reason is trauma bonding. Even though dismissive avoidants are known for their distance, they can still get trapped in unhealthy emotional cycles. If their partner alternates between warmth and coldness, it can create a push-pull dynamic that, ironically, feels familiar to them from childhood. This familiarity can keep them stuck, even when they consciously know they're unhappy. They may confuse the familiarity of that emotional roller coaster with stability, even though it's far from healthy. There's also the social perception factor. Some dismissive avoidants worry about how it will look if they leave, especially if they've been in the relationship for a long time or if there are children involved. They may fear judgment from friends, family, or their community. In some cases, they'll stay simply to avoid the disruption to their public image, prioritizing outward stability over inner happiness. It's worth mentioning that for dismissive avoidants, love and happiness aren't always the same currency. Their relationship satisfaction may be measured less by emotional intimacy and more by whether the relationship works in a practical sense. They may not seek joy in the way others do, they seek functionality. So even if passion is gone, as long as the relationship still fits their functional criteria, they can justify staying. And let's not forget, sometimes they just don't notice how unhappy they really are until it's too late. Their emotional numbing means they can overlook growing dissatisfaction. They may only realize the depth of their unhappiness during a crisis, like a major argument, a betrayal, or a life change. Until then, they can operate on emotional autopilot, convincing themselves they're fine. For the partner of a dismissive avoidant, this can be incredibly frustrating. You may feel like they're choosing misery over connection, like they're refusing to acknowledge the obvious. But from their perspective, staying is the path of least resistance. It's a combination of fear, habit, emotional detachment, and a value system that prioritizes control and stability over vulnerability and joy. So why do dismissive avoidants stay in unhappy relationships? Because leaving would require them to face the very things they've spent their whole lives avoiding: emotional exposure, uncertainty, and vulnerability. They'd rather stay in a relationship that works on paper, even if it feels empty in the heart. And until they do the deep inner work to feel safe with intimacy, this pattern is likely to continue. But here's the twist: you can't change this for them. If you're with a dismissive avoidant and you're waiting for them to wake up one day and realize they're unhappy enough to leave or change, you might be waiting forever. The choice to leave or to grow has to come from them. Your role is to decide what you are willing to accept and whether their comfort zone is also your happiness zone. And maybe that's the hardest part, realizing that for some people, unhappiness is tolerable as long as it's predictable. That's the dismissive avoidance paradox. They avoid pain by avoiding depth, but in doing so, they avoid joy too. And in the end, that's the cost they're willing to pay.